Over the last few years, we've been seeing more and more homeowners request dehumidifiers for their houses. But why? Well, let's find out. Hi, this is Kenneth with Atlas AC, and at any point during this video, if you find it to be helpful, please hit the like button, and that will really help me out with the YouTube algorithms. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is what is a whole home dehumidifier supposed to be accomplishing, and how does it work? And from there, what are the ideal applications for a whole home dehumidifier? So quick disclaimer, we largely sell AprilAire dehumidifiers, and the units that we typically install are the E80, E100, and E130. We also install other AprilAire and Carrier dehumidifier units. However, these are the most common. So as we're talking about dehumidification, that's really the reference point that I'm working off of. Whenever we come in contact with warm or cool air, we not only feel the temperature, but we also feel the humidity as well with it. For example, a 95-degree day in Phoenix with a 20% humidity level is going to feel completely different from a 95-degree day in Miami with a 95% humidity level. So in HVAC, we look at two different types of heat. The first being latent heat, which largely has to do with humidity, and the second being sensible heat, which has to do with the temperature. So in looking at what an HVAC system does for indoor air climate, it largely prioritizes the temperature and not so much the humidity. When an AC system is running, it is removing a large amount of humidity from the air. However, the problem is if you have the indoor temperature set at 72 degrees and the system satisfies and turns off, it doesn't matter what the humidity levels are, it is what it is. Now, not all HVAC systems are the same. Some do control humidity levels a lot better than others. You can also get a thermostat that monitors humidity levels and prioritizes the humidity levels, meaning if the humidity is too high, the system is going to run. The downside to this is sometimes the system is going to have to run a long time, which would drive down the indoor temperature fairly low, maybe even into the mid to low 60s. So you're essentially solving one problem only to create another one. So depending on where you live and the type of house that you have, your AC system may not be enough to remove the necessary amount of humidity. So this is where the whole home dehumidifier comes into play. It has the ability to fill in the gap where the AC system is struggling. What's interesting about humidity is the range that we find to be the most comfortable is largely the same range that ends up being the most healthy for our environment. So if we take a look at this chart here, we can see that the ideal humidity levels is in between 40 to 60%. So if we look at it from a comfort standpoint, and once humidity levels drop below 40%, then it just starts getting too dry. This could lead to dry skin, along with potentially damaging valuables in your house. And once humidity levels get over 60%, it can make your home feel muggy and sticky, along with potentially even damaging valuables in this scenario as well. And from a health perspective, you can see when humidity levels are not in between 40 to 60%, it can be a breeding ground for things like bacteria, viruses, fungus, mites, allergens, and so on. However, when humidity levels are in between 40 to 60%, these things have a harder time surviving in that type of an environment. And where a whole home dehumidifier comes into play is when humidity levels are constantly over 60% in your house, it can help bring it back into the ideal humidity levels, making your home a lot more comfortable and healthy throughout the year. So how does a whole home dehumidifier work? It's basically a small self-contained refrigeration unit that ties directly into your central ductwork. And much like your central AC system, it has a compressor, a condensing coil, an evap coil, and a blower. So the way that these units dehumidify the air is it first chills the air, and then from there it warms it back up. So when air first comes into the unit, it's going to meet the cold evaporator coil. From there, it's going to pass through the warm condensing coils and then over the compressor. And in this process, it's pulling the maximum amount of humidity out of the air. And since it is a self-contained refrigeration unit without an outdoor AC unit to get rid of the heat, the air that it's outputting ends up being warmer and drier than the air that is being inputted. And you might be saying, I just solved a humidity problem in my home only to create a heating issue. And this ends up not being the case because these units are actually pretty small. They're only conditioning a half a ton of air to a full ton of air when in operation. And the warm, dry air ends up acting like a sponge when it comes in contact with the cool, humid air, which ends up dehumidifying your house better, and it's just simply not putting out enough heat to really change the temperatures in your house. Now, how does a dehumidifier tie into a central AC system? There's about a dozen different ways to set up one of these units. However, I'm going to be talking about the way that we install. So when we install a dehumidifier, we utilize the existing central AC ductwork. There are three different ways that we typically install dehumidifiers. The first way to install a dehumidifier on a horizontal furnace is to tie a new duct run onto the existing return ductwork on your central AC system, then attach it to the dehumidifier. Then we'd run a second duct from the dehumidifier to the return plenum of your central AC. The second way we install dehumidifiers on horizontal furnaces is actually very similar to the first way. The only difference is how we tie the output air to the central ductwork. So for the output air on the dehumidifier, we take a duct and then tie it directly into the supply plenum of your central AC system. And as long as the supply ductwork is sized correctly, this method won't be a problem. And the third way is for upflow systems that are typically found in closets. And just like in example 2, the output duct is ran directly into the supply plenum of the central AC system. And since there's little to no room for the dehumidifier to install inside the closet, we typically have to install it in the attic. And since there's little to no room in the closet, we typically can't run a return air duct to the central AC system. So we install a new return air duct that is independent for the dehumidifier. And we normally install the new return air duct in a common area of the home. These units can remove anywhere in between 80 to 130 pints of water out of the air a day. So we run a new drain line in order to get rid of all the water that it's creating. These units are very energy efficient and don't consume very much power. So the majority of the time there's enough power already in the attic that we can access in order to wire up the unit. We then tie the low voltage wiring directly into the furnace, and we set up the dehumidifier to work with the furnace's blower. And it's set up to only come on whenever the central HVAC system is off. The dehumidifier comes with a controller that's mounted directly to it that we use to set the humidity levels. So once every 60 minutes, the dehumidifier is going to come on and sample the air to see how humid it is. If the air is too humid, it is then going to start dehumidifying. And since the dehumidifier is coupled with the blower on your furnace, that means the air is cycling throughout your entire house, resulting in whole home dehumidification. And these units also come with washable filters and should be cleaned once every 6 months. So what are some of the applications that make sense to use a whole home dehumidifier? So a lot of it starts with where you live. So let's use this AprilAire sizing chart to better help us separate out the regions in the United States. So you can probably tell that I'm located in the great state of Texas. So in our service area, we actually service 2 of these 3 regions. So I'm largely going to be talking about the B and C regions. In the B region, it is very common for humidity levels to reach up into the 80s, especially at the beginning of the day. And of course, throughout the day, the humidity levels will drop back off some. And the majority of the time in this region, if your AC system is sized correctly for your house, it should be able to keep humidity levels under 60%. And that is especially true in the times of the year when your AC is running more often. However, if you have an older home that's not tightly sealed or a house with a basement, then the AC system may not be enough. However, the big issue typically comes in the spring or the fall when the HVAC system is not being used that much. So when the temperatures are nice outside, the HVAC system doesn't really need to cycle that often, even though the humidity levels are still high. This could raise the humidity levels throughout your house, and sometimes the only solution is a dehumidifier. Now, if you're looking to solve this problem without using a dehumidifier, a lot of times in this region, a variable speed communicating system like the Carrier Infinity series can solve this problem. It's better equipped to deal with humidity, especially during the spring and the fall. So if we switch over to the C region, you can see that it's a lot more coastal, meaning a lot higher humidity. I'm not sure how this is scientifically possible, but I'm pretty sure in Houston, humidity levels get all the way up to 150%. Actually, in the C region, it is very common for many mornings to start off in the 90% humidity range. And when air gets this saturated with moisture, it's just simply hard to keep it out of the house. So in the B region, the humidity issues largely occur during the spring or the fall, so it's seasonal. However, in the C region, it ends up being an all year round issue. And because of this, this is where the vast majority of dehumidifiers are sold. So how do you know whether or not your humidity levels are over 60% in your home? If you have a smart thermostat, a lot of times they can measure humidity levels, so you might want to check that first. You can also get a cheap humidity gauge from Amazon or Walmart, and they're typically accurate within 2%. This should help give you a good feel of what the humidity levels are in your house. If you're interested in finding out pricing on a whole home dehumidifier, You might want to check out our website. We also have buyer's guides and other useful information. Until next time, have a good one.